The lobby was full when they stopped him. Not empty, not quiet, full. 40, maybe 50 people moving through the marble atrium of Hargrove Tower on a Tuesday morning in October. Coffees in hand, badges tapping, phones out. The kind of morning where no one really looks at anyone else because everyone is already somewhere else in their head. The coffee kiosk near the entrance had a line. The elevator banks were busy. A woman in a yellow coat was arguing quietly with her phone. Marcus walked in through the main doors at 8:11, and the lobby moved the way lobbies always moved around him. Not dramatically, not consciously, but the way water shifts when something large and unhurried enters it. People drifted a half step left or right without looking up. He was used to this. He had been used to it since he was 16 years old and taller than every teacher in the building. He wore dark pants, a navy thermal, and a pair of work boots that had logged a long season. He'd come directly from Greyhall Medical Center where he had spent the earlier part of his morning in operating room 3 with a man whose brain had decided not to wait for a convenient hour. He hadn't had time to go home and change. He'd thought about it. Then he'd looked at the clock and thought about the board meeting on the 23rd floor at 8:30 and decided the blazer could wait. He was the one they'd called. The blazer was just fabric. His hospital badge was clipped to his lapel but facing inward. It was a habit he'd carried for years, from a time, long before medicine, when he'd learned that a visible badge in an unfamiliar building sometimes complicated things it was meant to simplify. He had never fully interrogated that habit. He had theories. He'd entered the lobby, needed the restroom, seen a sign pointing left, followed it, and walked into a maintenance corridor instead. He turned around, he walked back out. That was when the man in the navy blazer saw him. His name was Dale Kramer. He was the building's head of operations, 8 weeks into the role, still learning the layout, still calibrating the weight of his authority. He'd been standing near the security desk reviewing a maintenance schedule when Marcus appeared from the direction of the service corridor. Big, quiet, work boots, the badge turned wrong, and Dale had done what Dale had trained himself to do across 20 years of hotel lobbies and corporate atriums. He had read the scene. He had drawn a line between what he expected to see and what he was seeing, and the line had been straight and immediate and entirely wrong. "Hey!" His voice carried across the floor. "Hey, stop there." Marcus stopped, not because he was startled, because he'd been stopped before. Many times, in many lobbies, by many men in many blazers. He stopped the way you stop when you've already decided that the next 60 seconds are not worth the energy it would take to make them worse. "Can I see your ID badge?" "I have a meeting," Marcus said. "Badge, please." Nobody in that lobby was watching the small woman standing near the water feature to the left of the main entrance. She had been there for 7 minutes. She was standing, not sitting, just standing, with a small dark green notebook open in her left hand and a pen resting between 2 fingers. She had watched Marcus walk in from across the lobby. She had watched Dale Kramer step forward and intercept him. She drew a single horizontal line across the width of the page. That was their first mistake. If this is the kind of story you need right now, subscribe. There are more coming. Marcus had been awake since 4:15. The call had come through the hospital's emergency line at 4:22. A 43-year-old male, construction foreman, trauma from a fall at a job site in the west end of the city, CT imaging showing a subdural bleed that was not going to wait for business hours or convenient scheduling. Marcus had been the attending neurosurgeon on call. He'd driven in while the city was still dark, the streets wet from overnight rain, traffic lights cycling through their colors for no one in particular. He drove with the radio off. He always did on those mornings. He needed quiet. He needed the 7 minutes between the parking structure and the scrub room to move from wherever he'd been when the call came, sometimes asleep, sometimes reading, sometimes simply sitting, into the state of focused stillness that the work required. The surgery took 2 hours and 18 minutes. The patient's name was Ray Tillman. He had a daughter in 3rd grade. Marcus knew this because the nurses had cataloged Ray's belongings when he came in, and inside his wallet was a photograph of a child's drawing. A house with a yellow sun and grass in 3 different shades of green, crayon, the kind of unself-conscious composition that exists only before the age of 8. Marcus had seen it when he passed the belongings tray. He didn't know why he always looked. Maybe it was habit from his years before medicine, when knowing what a man carried told you things about him that nothing else would. Maybe it was something simpler. Either way, he'd looked. And he'd operated with that image in the back of his mind the way he always operated, precisely, without hurry, without theater. He'd scrubbed out at 6:47. He stood in the locker room for 60 seconds with his eyes closed, his hand still in front of him. He did this after every significant case, not to decompress, there wasn't time for that, but to make a clean boundary between one thing and the next. Then he'd changed into what he had in his bag, the navy thermal, the dark pants. His formal blazer was in his office closet on the 7th floor. He'd thought about going up for it. Then he'd checked the time and thought about crosstown traffic and the board meeting at 8:30 and decided against it. He drove downtown with his hands at 10 and 2. The left hand had a particular mark, a pale ridge of compressed skin running from the first knuckle of the index finger to the second, the kind of indentation that develops over years of holding a retractor in the same precise position, thousands of repetitions, the body recording what the hands do. Most people who shook his hand didn't notice it. Occasionally someone did, and they'd ask, and he'd tell them, and they'd go quiet in that particular way people go quiet when something doesn't match the story they'd already written. He found parking 2 blocks from the tower. He walked. He always walked when he could, not for the air or the distance, but because walking was one of the few contexts where he could be exactly as large as he was without anyone needing to manage it. The sidewalk made room. He didn't have to ask. He passed a dry cleaner, a pharmacy, a woman walking a dog that stopped and sat when he came close and watched him pass with what he privately thought was the most honest reaction he'd gotten from anyone all week. He kept moving. The tower rose at the end of the block, glass and pale stone, the Hargrove name in modest letters above the entrance. He entered Hargrove Tower at 8:11. 19 minutes to spare. He'd needed the restroom. He'd seen the sign. He'd followed it into the wrong corridor. He'd turned around. He'd walked back into the lobby. And Dale Kramer had been there. Claire had arrived at the tower at 7:50, which was earlier than she needed to be there by approximately 40 minutes. She had a 9 o'clock operations review, a standing Tuesday meeting with the property management team for Hargrove Tower, the kind of meeting she could run in her sleep after 11 years of running some version of it in some building or another. But she'd started her morning at the coffee place 2 blocks away, a small low-ceilinged room with mismatched chairs and a proprietor who'd known her since she was 31 years old and had never once treated her like a curiosity. She'd gone there before this building existed. She'd gone there when Hargrove Capital was 3 people and a lease on a second-floor office on Meridian Street. She still went there because the coffee was exceptional and because some anchors are worth keeping. She was 5 feet 3 inches on the days she was being generous. She wore flat shoes. She'd stopped wearing heels in her mid-30s, not as a statement, but because she'd genuinely run out of patience with footwear that required management. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, dark trousers, a watch that had no logos visible and cost more than most people's first cars, and she carried a leather satchel over one shoulder and the dark green notebook in her left hand. The notebook was small enough to fit in a coat pocket. She'd carried one like it for 16 years, replacing it every time it filled up, always the same size and color from the same shop, a habit she had no intention of explaining to anyone. People looked past her in lobbies, they always had. In boardrooms, in elevators, in the front row of conferences where she was the keynote. She was compact and quiet and she moved without announcing herself, and so people made the assessment that people make. Her mind registered as EA, as assistant, as the person who carries things for someone more important, as an afterthought in a space full of main events. She had spent her early years being angered by this. Then she'd spent a few years being amused. Then she'd arrived somewhere else entirely, a place that was neither anger nor amusement but simply observation. She noted it. The way you note the weather, it told you things. Everything people reveal when they think you're not worth watching is enormously useful if you're paying attention. Claire was always paying attention. She entered the lobby at 7:53 and positioned herself near the water feature, a low wall of dark stone with water sliding silently and continuously down its face, and opened her notebook. She had a practice, before significant meetings, of writing 2 questions she didn't already know the answer to. Not an agenda, not a to-do list. 2 genuine unknowns. It was the discipline of someone who had learned, the hard way, that the meetings where you already know every answer are the meetings where you stop thinking. The first question she wrote that morning was about the new facilities vendor's payment terms. The second question she had not yet finished when the lobby doors opened. She was in the middle of her second question when the main doors opened and Marcus walked in. She noticed him the way she noticed most things. Peripherally, precisely. A tall man in a navy thermal with work boots and an inward-facing badge, moving without urgency toward the interior of the lobby, scanning for something. She tracked him the way she tracked everything. Without turning her head, without interrupting the motion of her pen, she watched Dale Kramer step into his path 30 seconds later. She did not move toward the front desk immediately. She had learned, through many years and many versions of this same situation in many different rooms, that rushing toward a thing while it's still developing usually makes it worse. You lose clarity, you lose the shape of it. She watched. She let the situation show her what it was before she decided what it required. She watched Dale's posture. She watched Marcus's stillness. She watched the woman at the front desk go carefully neutral. She watched the elevator bankmen slow and then stop without appearing to stop, and she drew a single horizontal line across the full width of the page. She waited. Dale Kramer had taken the position at Hargrove Tower because the pay was better than his previous 3 jobs combined, and because the recruiter had used the word prestigious 4 times in 20 minutes, and because Dale had always believed that certain buildings made a statement about the people who managed them. He was 51 years old. He'd spent 2 decades in high-end hotel management. Not luxury exactly, but aspirational. The kind of properties where the marble came from somewhere specific and the front desk staff were trained to remember names. He'd been good at it. He'd been good at reading rooms and reading people and maintaining the kind of frictionless order that guests in those places paid implicitly to experience. He'd built an instinct for it the way you build any instinct, through repetition, through feedback, through the quiet accumulation of 100,000 small judgments about who belonged and who didn't, which judgments were right and which were wrong, and which were simply never examined at all. He wasn't a villain. This is important. He was a man who coached youth basketball on Saturday mornings. He drove 40 minutes each way to his mother's nursing home every Sunday without fail, sat with her through whatever the afternoon brought, and drove home in the dark. He had a daughter in her 2nd year of college who called him most Thursdays. He was, in the architecture of his private life, someone who showed up. He was also a man who had arrived at this job 8 weeks ago carrying 20 years of pattern recognition that he had never once asked to sit down with and look at directly. He'd walked into this lobby and decided, the way you decide things you don't interrogate, what kind of building this was going to be on his watch. Orderly, controlled, everything and everyone in their appropriate place. He had seen Marcus come out of the service corridor, the work boots, the thermal, the turned badge, and his mind had completed the sentence before Marcus had taken 3 steps. He hadn't clocked the hospital badge. He hadn't looked at the hands. He hadn't noticed the stillness of a man who'd spent the last 2.5 hours doing extraordinarily precise work while someone else's life depended on it. He'd said hey, he'd said badge. And now, 6 minutes later, he was standing at the front desk in front of half a lobby's worth of witnesses and asking a neurosurgeon to empty his pockets. The thing about bad decisions made in front of crowds is that they compound. Each step forward requires the next step forward. To stop is to admit. And admitting, in the middle of a lobby, with the front desk clerk watching and the man in the suit watching and the coffee kiosk woman watching, that felt in the specific arithmetic of Dale Kramer's morning like something he could not afford. And he was doubling down. Because that's what happens when you've already spent a unit of authority and you can't afford to acknowledge that the foundation was wrong. You build higher. You make the structure taller. You believe, somehow, that the elevation will justify the construction. It almost never does. Badge, Dale said again at the front desk. I need to see your building credentials. Marcus reached into his right pocket. Slowly, without theater. He set his keys on the desk, his phone, a folded parking receipt from the garage 2 blocks over. and a small silver object, smooth-edged and well-worn, a retractor handle, the kind of instrument a surgeon carries out of a long case in a pocket without noticing until hours later. The front desk clerk looked at it and then at Marcus and then away. Dale picked it up. He turned it in his hand. "What is this?" "Surgical instrument," Marcus said. "You carry surgical instruments in your pocket." "Sometimes." A pause. It was a long morning. The man near the elevator bank, mid-40s, suit, the precise type who made a principle of not inserting himself into other people's business, had stopped entirely. He was examining his shoes. A woman near the coffee kiosk had suspended a conversation mid-sentence. The coffee machine hissed once and went quiet. The front desk clerk had the fixed expression of someone who has decided that the computer screen in front of her requires her complete and undivided attention and intends to maintain that decision indefinitely. "Left pocket," Dale said. The lobby held its breath. And then the small woman set her notebook down on the edge of the water feature. She crossed the lobby at the pace of someone who has nowhere to be urgently. Not slow, not rushed, grounded. The specific, grounded quality of a person for whom the decision to move has already been made and needs no further energy spent on it. She was barely visible behind the people between her and the desk. A man in a long overcoat almost walked directly into her, stopped, stepped aside, and didn't quite know why. She arrived beside Marcus at the front desk. Not behind him, beside him. She was standing next to a man who cleared most door frames, and the contrast was the kind that makes people look twice in spite of themselves. The visual arithmetic of it didn't add up in any familiar way. Several people noticed this and then pretended not to have noticed. She looked at Dale Kramer. Not at his blazer, not at his hands, not at the retractor handle he was still holding, at him. Level, complete. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was quiet. Not soft, there's a difference. Quiet the way a room goes quiet when something important is about to be said. Level the way a floor is level, completely in all directions, without announcement. Dale looked at her. He had the expression of a man who has committed to a direction and is now encountering weather he didn't check for. "Ma'am, this is a security procedure." "I understand what it is," she said. "If you could just give us a moment to—" "I'm going to need you to stop," she said. Just that. No elaboration, no raised voice, just the simple architecture of a sentence that means exactly what it says. Dale stopped. She did not look at Marcus. She kept her eyes on Dale. "And you are," Dale said. His voice had changed registers slightly without his permission. She waited her full second. People always mistook the pause for uncertainty. In 16 years of rooms that underestimated her, she had never once moved to correct that misapprehension. The pause was not uncertainty. It had never been uncertainty. "My name is Claire Hargrove," she said. "This building belonged to my father. It belongs to me." Dale's face went through several stages with the efficiency of a man who cannot afford to be seen processing bad information in public. Disbelief. Calculation. The very specific look of someone re-examining a sentence they thought they understood. "Miss Hargrove, the man whose pockets you're inspecting," she said, "holds a seat on the medical foundation board that leases the top 2 floors of this building. He has a board meeting on the 23rd floor in 11 minutes. You may want to think very carefully about what you've done and what you do next." She did not raise her voice at any point. She did not move toward him. She did not gesture. She stood her full height, which was not considerable, which had never been considerable, and delivered those sentences the way someone delivers something they've carried for a long time and are now simply setting down in the only appropriate place. Dale looked at Marcus. He looked at the retractor handle in his hand. He set it on the desk. "I was following building protocol. I know what you were following," she said, and then she stopped talking. Because there was nothing left to say and she knew it and the room knew it, and sometimes the most complete statement you can make is the one you leave finished. It was Joanna Park who walked in through the side entrance at 8:23 and completed the picture. Joanna had been with Hargrove Capital for 9 years, had been there when this building was acquired, when the carpets on 23 were still being installed, when Claire had stood in the empty 42nd floor and looked out at the city and said, simply, yes. This one. Joanna moved through the lobby the way people move through spaces they know entirely, and she spotted Claire first, then Marcus standing beside her, and she assembled the geometry of the morning in the time it took to cross the floor. Dr. Elliot. She extended her hand to Marcus. I should have met you at the entrance, I'm sorry. No need, Marcus said. She turned to Dale Kramer. When she spoke, her voice was precise and without particular emotion, the way facts are when they've been waiting. Dr. Elliot has been on the Foundation's Medical Advisory Board for 3 years. He consults on our clinical partnership with Greyhall. He's also, she paused briefly, the way you pause before something that settles everything. The man who performed the emergency neurosurgery last spring on our senior property manager, who is, as you may know, back at work full-time. The lobby absorbed this in silence. Dale Kramer looked at Marcus. Marcus was picking up his phone and his keys and his parking receipt from the front desk. He picked up the retractor handle last and put it back in his right pocket without looking at it. His movements were the same as they had been when he'd set everything down. Unhurried, precise, no wasted motion. He did not look at Dale. Dale looked at Claire. Whatever he had been in his own assessment when he'd walked into this lobby at 7:30 that morning, thorough, authoritative, doing the work that needed doing, he was something different now. He was a man standing inside the full weight of a wrong turn, in a lobby full of people who had witnessed it, and there was nothing to do with that except stand inside it until it was over. Ms. Hargrove, he started. She had opened her notebook again. She was writing something. Someone from HR will reach you this afternoon, she said. She didn't look up. He took a breath. He nodded once. He stepped back from the desk. The man in the long overcoat near the elevators was looking at the ceiling. The front desk clerk had found something urgent in her computer screen. 2 women near the coffee kiosk were not talking to each other, which was different from how they'd been standing before. The lobby was resuming its motion, the way water resumes its motion after something has been dropped into it, carefully and not all at once. Marcus looked once at Claire. She was still writing. She had not looked at him during any of it, not when she'd stepped to the desk, not when she'd spoken to Dale. Not when Joanna had arrived and named him. Not now. Then she looked up. It was brief. A single second, possibly less. She met his eyes without expression, the way you look at someone when you have both just witnessed the same thing and there is nothing useful to add to it. He met her eyes the same way. Neither of them smiled. He turned. Joanna fell in beside him, already talking through the agenda for the meeting upstairs. Something about the Q4 budget and a facilities question and a consultant's report that had come in late. The elevator doors opened. They stepped in. Claire watched the elevator doors close. Then she looked at the lobby, at the people returning to their motion, the morning smoothing over itself the way mornings do, the surface reassembling as though nothing had been disrupted. She drew one more line in the notebook. Then she closed it. He found her in the building's interior atrium after the meeting ended. It was a small space, a sort of garden indoors, low plantings and 2 wooden benches and a rectangular skylight that admitted whatever October chose to offer, which that morning was pale, thin light that didn't warm anything but clarified everything. The atrium opened off the main lobby but sat removed from the foot traffic. A deliberate quiet in the middle of the building's business. Claire was on one of the benches when Marcus came down at 10:44. Her satchel was beside her. Her notebook was open. He didn't sit immediately. He stood for a moment looking at the skylight, one hand at his side, the other in his pocket. Then he sat. Neither of them said anything. A phone rang somewhere in the lobby beyond, twice, and stopped. The light through the skylight moved slightly as something passed across it. You didn't have to do that, Marcus said. She didn't look up from the notebook. I know. I had it managed. You did, she said. That's not why I stepped in. He looked at her. She kept writing, not urgently, not dismissively, just writing. He didn't push. Then why, he said. She stopped. She set the pen in the crease of the notebook's spine and looked at the skylight. Because the room was full of people learning something, she said. What they learned mattered. He sat with that. He'll be let go, Marcus said. She was quiet for a moment. HR will speak with him. What follows? She paused. He's not someone who set out this morning to do harm. He's someone who never looked directly at what he'd built into himself. That has a cost. but it's a different kind of case than the other kind. There's still a cost." "Yes," she said, "there is. And he'll pay it. I just don't think the cost should be everything." She closed the notebook. She set it on the bench between them, not offered to him, not withheld, just there. "Your left hand," she said. "The ridge on the index finger." He looked down at it. "How long in the OR?" 14 years, he said. "Before that, 2 years doing something else where the hands were also relevant." She nodded. She did not ask what that something else was. He noticed that. It was the noticing that people who have spent a long time being read incorrectly learn to do. You register when someone doesn't reach for the obvious question. It told you things about them. "The retractor," she said. "You brought it out of this morning's surgery." "Long case," he said. "I didn't notice until I was already in the car." "Ray Tillman," she said. He went still. "He works for Morley Construction," she said. "We use Morley for our renovation projects. I had a message yesterday that one of their foremen had been taken to Greyhall. When I arrived this morning, I asked the desk to check on it." A pause. "The floor nurse said the attending was exceptionally good. That the outcome was better than projected." "She shouldn't have said that to you." "She said it to his wife first," Claire said. "I was a secondary recipient." Something in Marcus's posture shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but the way a room shifts when a window opens. He looked at the skylight. "He's going to recover well," he said. "I know," she said. "I checked." The atrium was very quiet. "The drawing in his wallet," Marcus said, without thinking. Then he stopped. She looked at him. "His daughter made him a drawing," he said. "House, yellow sun. The nurses had it out with his things." He paused. "I always look. I don't know why I always look." She was quiet for a moment. "I think you know why," she said. He looked at her. She didn't elaborate. He didn't need her to. "I'm sorry about this morning," he said finally. "Don't be," she said. "Mornings like that have found you before. Many times. And me," she said. He looked at her the way surgeons look at things when they're deciding something, not unkindly, not clinically, just fully. "You drew a line in the notebook," he said. "When you saw him stop me." She tilted her head slightly. "You noticed that from across the lobby." "I notice things," he said. "Trained to." "So am I," she said. A beat. "What does the line mean?" he asked. She picked up the notebook. She opened it to the page and held it briefly so he could see 2 horizontal lines, one near the top of the page, one near the bottom, drawn at 2 different moments of the same morning. Then she closed it. "It means I've decided to pay attention," she said. He looked at it for a moment after the notebook was closed. 2 lines, he said. She almost smiled. It didn't quite complete itself. 2 decisions. They sat another moment. Then she stood, satchel over her shoulder, notebook in hand. He stood too. The atrium did the thing that atriums do when 2 people who don't match any expected frame stand together in them. A couple of people passing the entrance looked, and then looked again, and then looked away with the slightly recalibrated expression of people who have just had a quiet assumption redistributed. Neither Marcus nor Claire noticed this, or rather, they had both spent a lifetime noticing it and deciding that it wasn't worth the energy it would take to carry. "You have somewhere to be," she said. "Hospital," he said. "There's always somewhere to be." She nodded. "I'll have the front desk create a permanent visitor credential for you, for the board meetings." "That's not necessary." "I know," she said. She walked out of the atrium into the lobby. He watched her for a moment. The satchel, the notebook, the particular quality of her movement, which was not small in any way except in the literal. Then he turned and walked toward the other exit. They did not exchange information. They did not make plans. They were 2 people with full lives and demanding work and cities that kept moving beneath them, and they both understood, without discussing it, that some moments don't require a plan. They require only that you were present for them. The front desk clerk, the young woman who had looked up the board meeting list, who had been very still while Dale Kramer held a surgical instrument and used the word policy, who had watched the small woman speak and watched the lobby change its temperature, told someone later that the 2 of them had left through opposite ends of the ground floor at almost exactly the same moment, and that neither of them had looked back. But both of them, she said, had been smiling. She wasn't certain about that. but she was certain enough to say it. The world makes its assessments in under 3 seconds. It makes them with tremendous confidence. It makes them based on height and boots and the direction a badge is facing and which corridor a person emerged from and what that corridor was designated for. It has been making these assessments for a very long time and has become extremely good at the speed of them, if not the accuracy. What it consistently underestimates, what it seems almost constitutionally incapable of accounting for, is this. The people it dismisses most reflexively have often spent years, sometimes decades, developing the one quality that power without scrutiny almost never builds: patience. The active kind. The kind that watches and waits and learns the shape of every room it enters, and knows with a precision that has nothing to do with anger and everything to do with practice, exactly when to step forward and exactly what to say when it does, not to prove anything, not to win, but because the room is full of people learning something, and what they learn matters. Marcus had carried that patience for 42 years. Through operating theaters and board meetings and service corridors and lobbies exactly like this one. He carried it the way he carried the retractor, in his pocket, worn smooth from use, always available when the situation required precision. Claire had carried hers longer. She had found, somewhere along the way, that it was not a burden, it was simply a tool. And she had always been very, very good with tools. The quietest power isn't the kind that walks into a room announcing itself. It's the kind that was already there, patient, precise, and certain, long before anyone thought to look. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs it. And subscribe, there are more stories like this one waiting.